3 years ago, I started producing my own music, and on January 1st, 2022, released my first video on YouTube. Since then, the channel has racked up more than 200,000 views, and in this video, I'm going to share with you my 10 principles for mixing, which have helped me get better results in less time. So before we get into the list, I just want to take a quick second and outline what this video is and what it isn't. It isn't a beginning mixing tutorial that's going to cover basic concepts like what is a compressor, what is an EQ, what is a bus. There are plenty of resources and great channels here on YouTube that you can check out where you can learn this stuff. What this is a list of principles that I've developed over my last 3 years or so of producing my own music here on YouTube. That has helped me streamline my process to get better results in less time. And also, the points are non-sequential, so like some of them may relate to other ones, but you can jump around and take the ones that you want and leave the rest. So the first tip would be to serve the source. What that means to me is when I'm mixing, I'm trying to make the track become the best version of itself that it can be. And how I do that is I use a combination of the micro lens and the macro lens. The micro lens would mean I'm trying to get the best possible sound at the point of recording. So like while I'm tracking, this includes mic choice, mic placement, what preamp am I using, what amp am I using, these kinds of things. Even if I'm using VSTs, I take time to really get the sound that I want first. So that this is gonna, as we're gonna see in a later point, this is gonna save me time when I'm actually getting to my processing. From the macro point of view, what serving the source means is I wanna understand what style of music I'm trying to mix for. I wanna understand what's the overall mood that I'm trying to accomplish, or the artist is trying to accomplish. Sometimes it's not my own music, it might be somebody else's music that I'm mixing. So with this in mind, you kind of remove yourself and get out of the way and put the material front and center. So this leads us into the next point, which is to imagine the sound that you want in your mind first. So just like you can imagine visually what something looks like in your mind, we want to develop the skill of being able to hear a sound in our mind. And this is a very difficult skill that takes a long time to develop, but it's a lifelong pursuit. And what you want to be able to do is, as you imagine, like if I say imagine what a trumpet sounds like, or imagine a specific song, specific recording, over time, you want to develop this skill to where that audiological representation gets more and more, gets greater degrees of resolution in your mind. So what this means for me, mixing, a lot of times it happens even before I start tracking or before I start mixing. I'll think about if there's a piece of music that I know I want to record, whether it's original or cover or whatever, I'll start thinking about, well, what do I want ultimately, what do I want this recording to sound like when it's leaving my speakers and coming back into my ears? And in so doing, this gives me a place to shoot for. It gives me like a North Star that every decision that I make from the first note that I track until I finish my master, I'm always working towards that picture. Doesn't mean that it won't change along the way. It just gives me an aspiration that I can strive for. And then over time, the process they meet in the middle somewhere. So now that you have a picture in mind and you have your material, what you're gonna need is a strategy to go from bringing your material closer to your picture. So what this means in terms of mixing for me is I might have an idea of what kind of tools I'm going to be using, how I want to have my track organized, and what kind of systems I'm going to use. And by systems, I mean like as an example, so a lot of people like to mix from the top down. What this means is that they start with their master bus and then they work their way back to the individual tracks. For me, the one that I use the most often, every session is different, but 99% of the, maybe 95% of the time, what I use is what I like to call middle out processing. I don't know if that's a technical term for it or not, but what this means is that before I start a session, I have an idea of how I want to have my instruments grouped So I'll have like, all my percussion stuff in one group and my low end information, chords, melodies. It might look like something like that. And then because I've done the work of getting the best sound I can at the source, I start to mix I just mix those groups instead of the individual channels. I reserve the individual channels for if something needs extra care as I work through my mix. But I mix from the buses. I try and get my mix somewhere between 80 and 90% of the way home with that. And then I go to my master bus where I try and then bring everything together. So that's an idea of a system that I like to use. More conceptually, and this kind of goes off of the point before, but I also like to think spatially and spectrally. So what that means is kind of like if you go to see like a theater, like a show or something like that, musical, they have like choreography and staging. Actors are coming into the center stage and they're moving back into the background, this kind of thing. I like to treat my instruments the same way. I want to know what instruments are the main characters, what instruments are playing supporting roles, how do I want them to move throughout the stereo field. And then spectrally is another cool one, because basically what you're trying to do with that is like, instead of thinking of a recording as a song and here's the bass part and here's the drum, the rhythm and here's the melody and whatever, I'm just trying to listen for frequency ranges. And I'm thinking very broadly. So just like a painter would have like, they're painting maybe a landscape, but they're thinking in terms of composition of the painting. What are the tones that they're using? What are the colors? Where are the highlights? Where are the shadows? So I kind of think like that. I'm constantly kind of like zooming in, zooming out, and thinking of the overall spectrum. So now that we're up and running with our mix, the next tip is to solve problems and to keep things moving. The idea here is that modern mixing basically offers us infinite possibilities. If you think about recording in the analog days, engineers and musicians were limited to the hardware that they were working with. We have essentially infinite possibilities now. And in effort of making things more efficient in your process, don't get bogged down exploring all of them. I'll talk about later when there's, how to look at things more creatively. But basically what your job 80% of the time is to solve problems, because you have your picture in mind, you have your material. Those are two big components. And then what you're doing along the way is troubleshooting when things arise. Because everything that you do is going to say like, am I getting closer to that picture or am I getting further away? If I'm getting further away, and maybe you want to be getting further away at a certain point, but still you're going to need to solve the problems that are occurring on the spot. The next tip would be to be aware of the song structure and the dynamics. So the mix is going to be most effective when it is treated like almost a silent musical voice. If you are aware of how the song is shaped, you're going to be able to have the mix ebb and flow with the dynamics of the song through automation and different kinds of processing and all these kinds of things. So realizing that you have ultimately maybe the most important voice in how that track is going to come across to the listener. So the more you can know about compositional technique, arranging, structure, all of these kinds of things, it's going to make you a much more effective mixer. So the next tip is super important and was one of the biggest game changers, I don't like that term, but whatever, for me. And that is to mix in context. What I mean by this is we all do this. We all have a tendency to do this, but like you're mixing, you get on your guitar track or whatever, and you solo it, and then you EQ that guitar track and you get it sounding really good. And then when you unsolo and you have all of the, listen to it with the rest of the mix, it sounds wrong. And this kind of goes back to the idea of thinking spectrally. As much as possible, mix while you're listening to the full mix. It's okay to occasionally zoom in on an instrument or a track and deal with it individually.
one piece of advice that I took with me when I was like learning was from 𝗁𝗲𝘁𝗀, who's on YouTube. And he would talk about when he was mixing an individual track in solo, he'd have like a timer in the back of his mind that once that clock went off, he had to listen to it in context with the rest of the mix. And I use that trick all the time. And this habit is difficult to do, or at least it was difficult for me, but it will pay big dividends in the long run, because essentially what you're doing when you solo a track and mix it individually, and then if you're not lucky enough to have it sound right in the mix, you just wasted a whole bunch of time. So this actually also helps you develop that inner ear kind of thing, because you're really getting a sense of how instruments and their ranges fit together. So that's a big one. I definitely recommend getting into that habit early and stick to it. The next tip is also super important, and that is to take breaks. So this can be difficult too, because when you get into the zone with mixing, where you're feeling like, really inspired and trying all sorts of creative stuff, hours can just fly away. But taking breaks, one, will help protect your hearing, which ultimately your ears are your most important tool that you have, because if you can't hear, you can't mix. And the other creative side of that is a lot of my mixing, and this just might be, an individual thing, but a lot of my mixing takes place away from the computer, believe it or not. A lot of times I'll take walks, and then as I'm walking, I'll start thinking about like, oh, maybe I want to try this kind of reverb on that instrument, or what kind of, should I use a dynamic EQ to try and get this frequency, to tame this frequency or whatever. A lot of the creative process happens when you're not at the computer. So everybody has different demands. If you're mixing commercially and you have like a really rigorous schedule, that's going to mean something for the hobbyist who can mix maybe an hour a day or something like that. But just remember that you need to do it. You need to budget it somewhere in your schedule and workflow, that you need to take some breaks. So the next tip is less is usually more, but sometimes more is more. Now, this kind of builds off of an earlier tip, which was to problem solve and to keep things moving. So if you're familiar with a concept called the Pareto principle, which is basically like the 80-20 rule, like 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of the effort. Most of my mixing, what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to get the maximum impact or result from the fewest possible steps. Again, I want to get things situated in a place where like the frequencies sound balanced, everything sounds like generally like it's vibing, it's getting the mood that I want. But then I want to budget that last 20% of time to exploring creative possibilities. Creativity is really important. It's often times like when you can think about a certain track where like, the way that they used like the delay on the snare in that track was really cool, or, this kind of reverb technique was really cool that you heard somewhere. So you want to have that kind of baked in to your process, so that when you stumble across something, you have the luxury of the time afforded to you to really try out those different possibilities and really get in there, because then the results that you might find, one, you're going to learn a lot from experimentation, and two, you might find something that's really cool that really connects with your audience and really makes your track stand out. So it's really a time management game, and it's a question of knowing when to mix from a utilitarian perspective and when to mix from a creative perspective. So the next tip is to do a little bit every day. Mixing is all about repetitions. It's all about experience. So if you can mix a little bit every day, that's going to make the next project better. And that's going to make the next project better. And you're going to be developing this foundation of experience and wisdom, and also accumulating tools that you're going to be able to roll into your next project. If you're somebody that's just starting, that can be really liberating, actually. Like, accept that your first mixes are probably going to suck. They're not going to sound good. Nobody's going to want to listen to them. But the next one's going to be better, and the next one's going to be better. And then the third one might be a little bit worse, but then the next one will be better. You know, so, and it's okay, and it's all part of the process. Even if that means that you record 2 8-bar loops one day and with 4 instruments, and then you just want to get those snippets to sound as good as possible. Just keep doing it, and then over years, it's going to accumulate and it's going to build up into something really meaningful. So this is the 10th tip, but it's not the last tip. I actually have a bonus tip after this one. But this one is what I call A.K.W, and that is always know why. Every action that you take in your mix should have a purpose. So even if that purpose is experimenting and exploring and trying to be creative, it should still have a purpose. It's very easy, especially in the early stages when you're just kind of learning about mixing, to throw a plug-in on a track because you saw somebody on YouTube do it or Instagram do it or whatever, and not really know the reason behind it, and not really even know if it makes it sound any better or not. And there is validity to that because that's all part of the experience. But basically, what I would recommend is that you should really know what the point of what you're doing is. Why are you using a linear phase EQ versus a zero latency EQ? Why are you using an 1176 versus an optical compressor? All of these kinds of things. Why am I scooping this frequency and boosting that frequency? It's very much like kind of like working with like a bonsai tree. It's like a very Zen thing. There needs to be a reason. Well, that's not really Zen, but the bonsai tree I think works. But there should be a reason behind every action that you take. So before we get to the bonus tip, I want to take this opportunity really quick to just introduce myself. My name is Gerald. I am a professional musician based in New York, and I've been posting here on YouTube on my Inner Motion Music YouTube channel for about 2 years. Maybe 3 years. This is technically the first episode in a new series that I'm starting on the channel, which is I'm calling the Mixdown. And what the Mixdown is I'm going to bring you into my sessions to show you how I make the things that I make. And it's not going to be like an exhaustive, where I'm breaking down everything that I'm doing and why this EQ and why that, it's not going to be that. Like, what I'm going to do is just talk about the overall process of things, highlight a couple of techniques that I use that I think make any particular track interesting, and hopefully just keep it fun and educational for everybody. So if that's something that you might be interested, come back. And with that, here is the last tip, the bonus super secret tip. And that is to always keep learning and find your voice. No two mixing engineers are the same. I'm fortunate that I have some friends that I can talk to about mixing who are in the field. And then also I watch a lot of stuff on YouTube, and I've seen totally contradicting opinions and advice out there. And they're both right. In some cases, I'm sure that there's other cases where one is wrong or maybe they're both wrong. The point is that if you, again, follow the process, stick to your plan, mix a little bit every day, and be flexible. Don't be doctrinaire. Always take in new information. Try new things. That's going to help you develop your own artistic voice as a mixer. And it is going to make you more in demand. It's going to make your own personal projects have more impact. And it's going to help you connect with other people, listeners, and other musicians and other engineers. And ultimately, I think that's kind of the point of all of this, is to connect with others. So that does it for episode 1. In episode 2, we're going to be looking at our first mix. So I don't know I don't think there's going to be like a set upload schedule. It's for this. I'm going to kind of just like play it by ear, but that will be coming soon. So hopefully I will see you there. Thank you for checking out this video. Check out one of these other videos and have a great day.